Let's say that you have the beautiful life. You have a great marriage. You've got the career, the family, the 2.5 kids, the dog, the white picket fence. You work out, you're in great shape, you have accomplishments galore, and yet you still feel like you're not free. Why? Why do you feel like you're not free? You have everything that you thought you wanted. The reason that you don't feel free is because freedom is not just about what your life looks like on the outside. It is also, or even maybe more, what's happening inside of you. What does your internal landscape look like?
Hey, and welcome to Masks Off Inner Freedom for People Pleasers and Perfectionists. This is a podcast for those who are tired of holding it all together. I'm Kim Gross, your host, and if you've ever felt like you're doing all the right things, but still feel anxious, disconnected, or quietly burned out, you're in the right place. Here we talk about the patterns you don't even realize you're living inside of: self-abandonment, over-functioning, chasing approval, and mistaking productivity for your worth, and more. This isn't about fixing yourself. It's about remembering who you were before you learned to perform, perfect, and please to belong. Each week, we'll slow things down. We'll unpack the nervous system, the inner critic, and the subtle ways that you learned to disconnect from your true self so you can stop living from pressure and start living from presence. This is your space to take the masks off. So let's begin.
Today, I want to talk about, or actually introduce you to, the inner controller. Now, I know I have talked about the inner controller in prior episodes, but I am going to actually take the month of June and be very intentional about helping us to really understand the nuances of the inner controller and get to know this part of us more intimately. Why? The reason why is so that we can have more inner peace and more freedom. So I've often talked about or used the terminology to go from prison to paradise. And sometimes I even say that we go from a people pleasing and perfectionistic prison to paradise. And I want to talk more about this theme. First of all, I want to just say that paradise, when I talk about paradise, it's not about perfection. It's not about having everything look just so or be just. It's not about having everyone like you. It's not about having the perfect body. It's not about your body not changing and getting older, or your relationships never triggering you, or your kids never triggering you. Paradise is not about your life never falling apart. Paradise is about inner freedom. It's about freedom. It's about the ability to feel at home inside of yourself, to feel at home inside of yourself. It's the ability to be with life without this constant need or drive to manage, prevent, fix, rescue, and control the shit out of everything. It is the ability to say to yourself or to believe that you can meet this moment without abandoning yourself. So often we think that paradise is about creating this external world, this external life for ourselves, where it is this perfect relationship, having the perfect body, the perfect family, the perfect career, having the right zip code or the right number of digits in the bank account, or having perfect health. And everyone just loves you because they are adoring you and showering you with attention and approval. What I have learned through my own experience and what I have witnessed is that you could be standing in the middle of what looks and seems like paradise and still feel imprisoned, especially if you have a strong inner controller that is driving the bus. So to give you an example of how this used to show up for me, I can recall when my kids were younger being on several family vacations. And literally, one would describe where we were as paradise. Five-star hotel, like beautiful hotels in the Caribbeans, palm trees, the weather was beautiful, the beach, other kids running around, playing and screaming, and just seeming like we were in paradise. And one would say that I was in paradise, except for the fact that internally, I did not feel it at all. I couldn't fully appreciate or take in my external surrounding because my inner controller was so strong in those days that she was micromanaging everyone, worrying and making sure that everyone else, my kids and my husband, were okay, that their mental and emotional well being was in a good place, regardless of mine. And not only that, but I didn't know how to be present in those days and I didn't know how to rest. So even though I could be sitting poolside, relaxing and lounging, my mind, my mental chatter was going 24/7. It was just full fledged. So I was not truly in paradise because I was imprisoned in my mind. So on the outside, it looked like it was amazing, but on the inside, what I was actually doing was scanning, I was anticipating, I was trying to prevent people from being upset or disappointed with me. And that kept me stuck. So, what is the inner controller really? What does it look like? What does that actually mean? The inner controller is the part of you and the part of me that believes that safety is going to come from managing everything. I always talk about micromanaging everyone and everything. And it's trying to manage how people are feeling, what their emotions are. She's trying to manage how we are perceived. She's managing how we perform. She's micromanaging how our bodies look, how our relationships look, the health, our choices, our futures. She's trying to manage the fear of uncertainty. She's trying to avoid conflict, and she's trying to avoid having other people be disappointed or upset with us. Sounds exhausting, does it not? She's a very busy part of us. And the inner controller is the part of us that says, if I could just stay ahead of everything and anticipate any future catastrophe, then nothing bad will happen and I'll be safe. It's the part of us that believes if I just get everything right, if I just do everything perfectly, cross all the T's, dot the I's, keep everyone happy, avoid making mistakes, prepare for every outcome, never be too much, then I can finally relax. And so your inner controller might sound like this. What if they get mad at me? What if I say the wrong thing and then they're really upset with me and they don't want to be in my life anymore? And then what if I disappoint them? They won't love me anymore. They won't like me anymore. What if I make the wrong decision and it ends up being a catastrophe? What if something is really wrong with my body, my health? What if I fail? What if they end up leaving me? What if I'm too much? What if I'm not enough? What if I can't handle what happens next? So one of the things that I used to do, and it's exhausting to tell this story, and I wrote about this in my book, Free to Be, A Pathway to Inner Liberation. If you want to get the full story and the context of it all, I highly recommend that you pick up a copy.
Before we keep going, I want to take a moment to share something really close to my heart. If you're listening to this podcast and you're thinking, wow, this feels familiar, the people pleasing, the perfectionism, the constant self pressure, I wrote a book just for you. It's called Free to Be, A Pathway to Inner Liberation, and it's part memoir, part healing guide. I share my own journey of learning how to stop living in victimhood, take off the masks, and come home to myself, but not by fixing myself, by understanding my patterns with compassion. This isn't a book full of fluff or quick fixes. It's honest, it's grounding, and it's for anyone who's ready to live with more peace and freedom. You can find Free to Be on Amazon. And if the book resonates with you, I would be so grateful if you would take a moment to leave a review. Even a few words can really help others to find it.
Essentially, the story that I told in the book was how for many years, every Christmas, I would go to the extreme of decorating two Christmas trees. I would wrap over 100 different gifts. I would send out 40 to 50 Christmas cards, bake all the Christmas cookies, stand in long ass lines when my kids were little to get the perfect right gift from Santa. And then late at night, wrapping the gifts in my cold, dark basement because I didn't want the kids to see the gifts. And then when the holiday finally arrived, just bouncing around like a chicken with its head cut off, making sure that everyone was having a good time and everyone's needs were met, all while ignoring my own, and then feeling utterly exhausted, disillusioned, and discouraged. Like, what was the big deal about this holiday? I started to actually dread the holidays. And I used to think that I was just being a good mom or being a good host, and I was just trying to make everyone happy. That I used to think I was just being a good mom. But at the end of the day, I was just trying to gain the approval. I was people pleasing and wanted everyone to think that I was amazing. So, why do we even have an inner controller? Why does the inner controller come into existence in the first place? And the inner controller usually develops for a reason. It's not something that's random. It's not a flaw. It's not a personality trait, as I talked about so often in other episodes. It is actually an adaptation. And I specifically talked about how these are nervous system adaptations in last week's episode with my guest, Lori Montry. And that was such a great conversation. So I highly recommend that you go back and check that episode out if you haven't listened to it already. So it's an adaptation. At some point in time, we may have learned that love actually feels safer when I'm performing or I'm earning it. Connection feels safer when I'm pleasing and I'm doing everything that everyone expects of me. It's just safer that way. Approval feels safer when I get things right, when I'm doing all the right things. I'm taking care of things around the house. I'm getting things done for people. If people want to get shit done, they come to me because they know that I will get it done. And I'm like, oh, isn't Kim amazing? She's just so competent and can get so many things done. That feels safer than if I say no, right? Also, emotions will feel safer if I suppress them because big emotions, big feelings are uncomfortable. They're not safe. These are the things that we may have learned early on. And relationships feel safer if I'm monitoring, if I'm scanning for how people are showing up themselves. And then I can decide, how do I show up in relationship to how they're showing up? If they're in a good mood, then I can be in a good mood. If they're upset, then I got to be careful and watch out. If they're in a bad mood, depressed, then I have to do something to fix it. So life feels safer when I stay in control. And the inner controller often forms when some younger version of us, some younger version decided that I need to manage myself and I have to try to manage everything around me in order to be okay, especially if you grew up in a dysfunctional home with eggshell environment or chaos. You most likely definitely decided that you had to manage yourself and manage your environment in order to stay safe. And so while this may have been a very brilliant, smart survival strategy at one point, and it may have protected us, but what once protected us is now keeping us stuck in a prison, a mental prison. It's keeping us imprisoned. When I was 10 years old, and again, this is another story that I share in my book as well, I tried out for the role of Snow White. And I was told that I was not going to be able to be Snow White because I couldn't sing. I was 10 years old. I was a little girl. You don't tell somebody you suck, right? But you would be much better working on the props. So that's what we're going to have you do. And that was devastating for me. It was a devastating experience. And it's not an uncommon one. That's a normal part of life. But I think what made it so difficult for me was that I didn't have anyone tell me or reassure me that the fact that I didn't get the role had nothing to do with me as a person. I internalized that experience as I was bad and there was something wrong with me. So my inner controller didn't want to have me experience that kind of pain. So she went into full fledged, let me control protection plan. And I'm going to make sure that you don't have to experience that kind of emotional pain again. So we're going to work really hard at performing and perfecting. You're going to get straight A's. You're going to be an athlete because you know you can succeed in those areas. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to get straight A's and we're going to do really well in sports and we're going to be liked by everybody. And so that's the part of me, that younger version was like, okay, I'm not going to feel that kind of vulnerability again. And if I want to feel safe, I want to feel accepted, then this is what I need to do. I will perform, perfect, and please. We might think, or it might seem like the inner controller is promising freedom, but in reality, it's just keeping us stuck and in prison. And that's why I talked about in the beginning of this episode going from prison to paradise. I'm not talking about literal prison, I'm talking about prison of the mind, prison where we feel trapped in our patterns, we feel stuck in our lives because we don't have peace, we don't have freedom. And we are caught in this place that if I just keep controlling, then I will feel safe or then I will have freedom. And it's actually the inner controller says if you just control, then you will feel safe. But in actuality, what happens? You end up feeling trapped in your mind. You feel disconnected from your body because if this part of you is trying to protect all the time and you're in your mind, you're in your head, you disconnect from your body, and then you become dependent on other people's reactions all the time. You only feel okay if people are giving you what you want and desire in terms of feeling safe. You feel like you can't rest, just like I shared on vacations. I was physically resting, but I couldn't really rest because my mind, my inner controller, was always on, always scanning, always working. And my inner controller is afraid of making mistakes all the time. She's hyper aware of everything that could go wrong. She future catastrophizes all the time. And so you also become a prisoner of approval, prisoner of needing certainty, prisoner of needing perfection and of performing. So all of these behaviors, all of these patterns that we are playing out are what keeps us imprisoned. And what we end up doing is living out a pattern and not a life. And there is no freedom in that. So let's talk some more about what these prisons can look like, because I keep using this term and it may not be super clear or you're not fully resonating just yet with what the prison can feel like. So let's start by talking about approval. So your inner controller will say, If they approve of me, if other people approve of me, my spouse, my parents, my coworkers, my boss, my kids, if they all approve of me, then I am safe. But here's the problem with that, with approval. You become dependent on how other people are responding to you. And if they're not giving you the validation, the praise, the energy, the vibe that they do approve, you feel unsettled. You don't feel okay inside of yourself. And that is not freedom. That is living in prison. One of the areas where I was dependent on other people's approval was through this podcast and my social media. There was a time when I would put something out on social media or release an episode in the beginning, and I would constantly check and see how many views I had, how many likes I had, or if there were any comments. And if I didn't have them, if I didn't have what I thought or expected I should, then it went to a place of, oh my goodness, people don't like me or they don't like what I'm putting out there. And so the way that I was feeling internally became dependent on the external validation from others, from the approval of others. What's the second area, the second prison? Perfection. The inner controller will say, if I do everything perfectly, if I get this right, I cross my T's, dot my I's, then I won't be criticized. How could I be criticized if I'm doing everything perfectly? But what's the prison? The prison is that you are never allowed to be human. You have to be doing everything perfectly all the time. And that's so much pressure and it's so exhausting and it's not possible. Anyway, none of us are perfect. Another example for me is when I was writing my book. I just mentioned it a couple of times. And I can remember there were times through the process where I kept going over chapters or paragraphs over and over again, trying to get it perfect. Because if it wasn't perfect, then when people picked up my book, they might judge it, they might criticize it and say, this isn't a well-written book. What's wrong with her putting this out there? So I thought that if I was trying to be perfect about my book, then I would avoid criticism. And that just isn't true. It actually just drove me crazy until I finally was like, okay, Kim. And I was aware of what I was doing. And then I let go, and good enough was good enough. Another prison is certainty. So the inner controller will say, if I know what's going to happen in the future, if I can predict with certainty, then I can finally relax. But the problem is, and here's the prison, that life never gives us complete certainty. It's just not possible. There's no way to absolutely know for sure. And the inner controller is always trying to get a guarantee from life. And it was never designed to give us one. I struggle with the lack of certainty is when it comes to health issues. When I have a health crisis, if I don't know for sure that I'm going to be okay or what's going on with me, or until a test result comes back, one, I will worry, I will feel anxious, but then I might do a ton of research, or I might be calling the doctor, or I go to the doctor over and over just to get that reassurance that there's nothing wrong with me and that I'm okay. But that's not a guarantee. There is no absolute certainty. So you can see how that can keep us stuck in a prison as well. And then the fourth one that I wanted to share is when the inner controller says, if I don't feel these feelings or these emotions, then I can't be hurt or I won't feel pain. The truth is that until emotions are felt and processed, they don't disappear. They can end up coming out as anxiety, clearly as control, maybe resentment, feeling exhausted, emotionally exhausted, numbness, or even emotional reactivity. So the inner controller will try to avoid feeling feelings, but ultimately, when we try to avoid, it ends up backfiring and then keeping us imprisoned as well. And this was just something that I used to do for so many years because I was always afraid that if I allowed myself to tap into the pain, that it would never end or that the pain would swallow me whole and I would fall into some type of deep, dark abyss that I would never be able to come out of. And I can promise you that by suppressing or ignoring your feelings and emotions will only make your life worse. So, what is the cost of living from our inner controller? What's the big deal? What is the big deal if we have our inner controller driving the bus? Here's the cost. One, if we're always trying to be in control and doing the things that I have already mentioned in this episode, it can cost us our inner peace, true rest, truly being able to just rest, being present in the moment. There's nothing more yummy and delicious than when you can be fully present in the moment. It can cost us joy, our creativity. It can cost us being authentic, connection to ourselves, having a relationship with ourselves, connecting to our truth. Because if we're letting our inner controller drive the bus, very likely we're ignoring our truth, our inner truth. It can cost us the ability to receive love without having to earn it, without having to earn love. Imagine that. Your inner controller can surely help you look like a high functioning person. For sure, you can look like you have it all together. But the truth is, you're most likely feeling exhausted inside. Your inner controller can help you achieve, but can you really receive? Your inner controller can help you be liked. She can really help you be liked. But are you truly known? Your inner controller can help you avoid conflict. But can you really experience intimacy? Your inner controller can help you to survive your life. There's no doubt about that. But do you fully live life? True freedom does not come from shaming your inner controller or trying to kill the inner controller, exile the inner controller, cut off from your inner controller. It comes from a true understanding of why it's protecting you and what it's protecting you from. And then building enough inner safety that it no longer has to run your life. And this is very important because it keeps us in a place where we can be more compassionate and more gentle rather than being critical or judgmental. And I personally don't believe that we can heal by attacking the parts of ourselves that helped us survive. I've been down that road. I have beat myself over the head with a 2x4, the proverbial 2x4. And it wasn't until I started to be compassionate and more gentle and give grace to the parts of myself that were trying to protect me. And my inner controller did not need more shame. My inner controller just needs to be understood. And that doesn't mean that just because I have done this work that the inner controller is completely gone. She still does show up. She shows up all the time. And I just shared recently in an episode where my inner controller was trying to manage and fix because I have this project going on in my kitchen, the renovation project. And I was feeling anxious. I was feeling overwhelmed. And my inner controller was trying to help me through that situation by going into fix it mode. I kept calling the contractor over and over, trying to control the outcome. I was trying to control an outcome. And even just as recent as yesterday, I had to really just be with my inner controller and say, okay, you know what? We have to let go. It's time to let go. My wise, healthy adult self came in yesterday to my inner controller, to my younger parts, and said, we clearly cannot control people, places, and things. We cannot control the outcome of this kitchen project. We were supposed to have our countertops installed yesterday. They were the wrong ones. They didn't get installed, and now it means waiting longer. And I initially went to the place of feeling so much anxiety about that because I have an expectation that this project be done ASAP. I'm so sick and tired of living in the dust and the filth and the chaos. And I feel overwhelmed. And I cannot control people, places, and things. I cannot force an outcome. And my inner controller so desperately wants to be able to control this situation. And my adult self just had to come in and say, it's okay. It's okay. I know that this is hard for you. I know that you feel overwhelmed. We're just going to go one day at a time. Just breathe and come up with some other alternatives for how I can feel more at ease through this situation. So it's not about shaming my inner controller. It's just being with and showing up for that part of me that is struggling so much. And it's also important to know that you do not move from prison to paradise by simply just telling yourself to stop controlling. I couldn't just tell my inner controller, just be quiet, stop trying to control. That wasn't going to happen. I had to understand why my inner controller was doing it in the first place. And that's the deeper work because at the end of the day, where that came from is my younger parts that needed to control her environment when the environment felt chaotic and scary and out of control, when she felt powerless as a little girl. My inner controller had to come in. and protect. So when I can think about it that way, it's a lot easier for me to have compassion for that part of myself instead of saying, Kim, what's the big freaking deal? It's a kitchen project. Suck it up. Stop being such a complainer. There's so many people that have it worse than you. Why are you complaining? If I did that, if I resisted that younger part of me or my inner controller and just shamed my inner controller, it would only continue to persist. So for this week, I invite you to see if you can notice, catch, pay attention to your inner controller and just notice your behaviors. You might be able to ask yourself, where am I trying to control something right now? Am I overthinking? Am I people pleasing? Am I perfecting? Am I trying to manage someone's reactions? Am I scanning other people? Am I scanning the room? Am I rehearsing a conversation that I don't want to have because it's too scary? Am I trying to prevent disappointment from another? And then ask yourself this deeper question. What are you afraid would happen if you didn't control this situation? And then you could just place your hand on your heart or on your belly, and you could just say to yourself, I see why you're trying to protect me right now. And I'm here with you. I'm here now. We don't have to have this all figured out in this moment. You really don't. But I also want to caution and say that what I'm suggesting is not about becoming passive and just sitting back and doing nothing. It's not about never making plans or never being responsible. I make plans all the time and I still have responsibilities. But it is about noticing when responsibility has turned into self protection. And then the self protection turns into self imprisonment. So remember, the key is that what is the energy behind why you're doing it? If it's coming from a fear place, a lack place, or scarcity, then you're most likely going to be controlling, and your inner controller is driving the bus. So if you are listening to this episode and you are thinking to yourself, or you're realizing, wow, this is me. This is me. I am exhausted from living under the rule or reign of my inner controller. This is the kind of work that I do, where I help women one on one. And we look beneath the surface of these patterns. What's underneath? What's underneath the people pleasing? What's underneath the perfectionism, the overthinking, and the control? And then they begin to understand why they are protecting, why this part is trying to protect. They start to, oh my God, wow, I see now. And then I teach them how to start creating the inner safety for themselves. And then they can start to create freedom from the inside out. Again, if this episode stirred something in you, I would love to support you. This is the work that I do. And if you're ready to stop performing, pleasing, and perfecting, and you want to actually start feeling free, I invite you to reach out. The inner controller, your inner controller, may have helped you survive. It really might have helped survive at one point. It may have helped you to be good, responsible, impressive, even prepared, liked, safe. But you were not born just to be controlled or to control your life. You were not born to perform, perfect, or please. And you were not born to manage everyone around you or to even manage your life. You were born to live free, to be free. That's why my book is called Free to Be, a pathway to inner liberation. So I hope that this episode was helpful and you found value in it. And I appreciate you being here.
As we wrap up today's episode, I just want to say thank you for being here and for taking this time for yourself. If this episode resonated with you, I'd really appreciate it if you would subscribe to the podcast or leave a review. Even a quick star rating helps more people find this space and reminds the algorithms that these conversations matter. And I'd love to hear from you. If you have a question, a takeaway, or something that came up while you were listening, leave a comment or send it in. Let's keep the conversation going. This podcast isn't meant to be a one-way street. It's meant to feel like a community. If you want to learn more about me, my work, or the ways we can go deeper together, you can visit my website. All the details are there. Until next time, take a breath, take the mask off, and be gentle with yourself. I'll see you soon.